r/AskReddit. In honor of Denver's decriminalization of magic mushrooms, doctors of Reddit, what, if any, is your best story of patients on hallucinogenics? In a busy urban ED, one unkempt looking man with altered mental status sits calmly and tiredly in a bed along the wall in the hallway. As I walk by, he grabs me, with a worried look on his face, and says in the most classic stoner voice, "Hey, man. Why does the time on that clock keep changing?" Me. "That's what it's supposed to do." Patient. Dot. "Ooh yeah." Laughs. Still one of my most memorable encounters. I was at culinary school in fish fabrication class and we did a demo tasting one morning and a kid got hallucinogenic fish poisoning. At least that's what our chef and the ER surmised. He said he started to see red. Literally everything was red. Raised his hand and asked the chef for help. The chef, thinking the kid was hungover, berated him a little before sending him off to get help. He was okay though. I'm an IQ doctor in Denver actually. My experience is limited to the unit. But I imagine ED doctors see more patients on hallucinogens than I do. Never seen a patient land in my IQ due to hallucinogens. But I'm sure it has happened and wouldn't be surprised as there aren't basic screening tests for LSD or mushrooms. We see altered people all the time and many times we don't know why or we pin it on one drug we find positive in their urine. Obviously though, patients can take more than one type of illicit including the undetectable ones like K2, LSD, mushrooms, or synthetics. The closest I've ever had to a patient confirmed hallucinogen in the inpatient setting was in medical school. I was following a young kid in the inpatient psychiatric ward who had taken mushrooms or acid and later developed some depersonalization issues and paranoid delusions. He probably had an underlying, undiagnosed psychiatric disorder to begin with though. When I was a medical student, I saw a guy high as balls on PCP. I was working with a tiny little Asian chick who was a PGY3 resident. And when we walked in the room, this giant naked white dude high as hell sees her and screams that she was the devil or something. Guy lunges at her, and the cop in the room promptly slams him onto the bed. I try to help like any med student working in the field they wanna match in. And I swing around behind the guy, who's actively winning the MMA match with the cop, and grab him into a chokehold. Excellent bedside manner was a comment I got on my slip that day. I pin him for a femtosecond before he realizes he's crispy as shit on that good old fencyclidine. And he springs his upper body forward, swinging me over the back of the bed seat right onto his lap. It took me like 5 seconds to realize what happened. I nope right out of there right before the police tased him into oblivion. Hours later he was asking us rather politely for some orange juice with all 4 limbs restrained. I'm a doctor now. But before that I volunteered as a transporter. I had just taken a patient from the emergency department to the CT scan room. An announcement came on saying code strong pediatric emergency department security was needed in the PEDS ED. This is usually a parent causing a problem. You just shake your head and hope security does its job. Suddenly I saw a teenage kid in a hospital gown sprint past the door of the CT room, flailing his arms and screaming. I looked out the door and at that moment this skinny 14-year-old teenager was tackled, more like speared, by one of our very large, former linebacker security guard. Kid goes down wailing and they control him. I sort of slinked back into the room as if nothing happened. I later heard through the grapevine that the kid had done so much acid he was freaking out. Parents had taken him to the hospital to get help. But he had other plans and escaped, but not far. My father's story. Man was admitted to ER with non-fatal but severe injuries. He immediately starts spewing racist remarks at the black nurses as they wheel him towards the only remaining bed in the hospital, a bed sharing a room where a Southern Baptist minister was having his last hours. When the wife had asked the staff if they could call family to come to the hospital to be with him when he passed, they didn't realize nearly the whole congregation was going to turn up. The tripping racist is being wheeled through hallways lined with the congregation holding candles. He started to panic that he was about to be sacrificed and began pleading for his life. I'm a doctor. Not a great story. But I had a kid come into ED after taking some mushrooms at a bush doof and then feeling weird. We told him it was probably the drugs that he took. It hadn't occurred to him they might be linked. In my town though, the great majority of drug-related presentations are from meth. And they aren't pretty. We get meth-induced heart attacks, meth-induced seizures, meth-induced motor vehicle accidents, meth-induced sexual violence, and my personal favorite, meth-induced dickheadery, where a patient is being a dickhead in the community, and the police can't take them to the watch house so they come to hospital instead. I've been spat on, punched, kicked and called every name under the sun by meth-influenced patients. I've seen tiny psychotic women requiring 4 security guards and 4 police officers to restrain so that we can sedate them for their own safety. Meth is not good, kids. Edit. A bush doof is like a rave in the bush. Sorry for the confusion. As a nurse, patient came in running in the ER asking for a blood transfusion cause he believed that vampire bit his neck. Patient had no any visible marks or scars. Held him down for a while and asked him to calm down. He was so frightened that he asked for garlic to keep the vampires away. Eventually he calmed down and walked out on his own with no problem. Hope that you're reading this. I wanna take what you're taking. Actual doctor here. Busy overnight shift in ER. 16-year-old brought in with police custody. Like 3 dudes. In vests and heavily armed. Kid's eyes were huge and his body was covered in scratches. Apparently, he and his girlfriend did LSD for the first time. Took off all of his clothes and jumped a balcony. Ran through a forest. And she called the police. Police reportedly took the better part of an hour corralling this naked 16-year-old running through the forest. Accumulating scratches from branches. The mental image killed me. The high had worn off for the kid at this point. Discharged on arrival. Essentially, my only medical advice was, next time, find a babysitter. But yeah, I work in some of the worst heroin trafficking parts of the country. People can get real crazy. I'm not a doctor, but I was working as a paramedic at a music festival when we got called to a kid tripping on who knows what. The guy had climbed to the top of a portable generator stadium light. So he's 20 feet in the air. On a light pole staring into this blazing midnight sun screaming, "I'm a moth, go into the flame." We had several cops, firefighters and myself standing at the base for 30 minutes discussing how to get him down without killing him or us. The entire time a crowd of people on drugs is surrounding us to see how it all plays out. Do we get a ladder truck and try to coax him down? What if he won't go? Do we spray mace up there? What if he falls? All of a sudden this greasy looking janitor walks up. Turns off power to the generator. Turns on his flashlight and aims it at the Mothman. Dude looks at the flashlight on the ground. Scambles down and follows it to the medical rent like a puppy about to get a snack. I'm embarrassed that none of us thought about that. I'm an anesthetist. During a C-section the epidural seemed to not fully be working and the patient was feeling pain, so we were forced to give ketamine. Ketamine has many effects and one of which is profound pain blocking, analgesia. It's safe to use in this case because it won't stop the baby from breathing like morphine or fentanyl would. Ketamine also causes hallucinations, like severe hallucinations. Patient stopped screaming from pain and began screaming from the dragons. Oh shit. Oh shit. AHHH. Get them away while being totally pain-free and comfortable. It was not in a terrified way but more of an excited I can't believe it kind of way. When the baby came out and began crying it turned to what in the fuck is that? Oh my god. That lasted a solid 20 minutes. Edit. Thanks for the gold. First gold coin ever. Was working night shift on inpatient service. ED called to admit someone. We've got a 17-year-old down here with altered mental status. We think he needs to be admitted for eval monitoring. VSS. Chem fine. Etc. Etc. Now, I'm not a pediatrician. I don't do kids. I don't understand why the ED is calling me. But I'm an intern and it's 2 in the morning, so arguing about it is stupid. I headed to the ED. I get there to see a young dude sitting there with his parents. I'll mention that his dad was a full bird colonel and very much fit the archetype. And his mom seemed to fit that type of personality. 2. The kid is literally rolling around in his bed, alternating between crying, asking if he was going to die, rubbing his dad's hand, and telling him how much he loved him. I had to sit there and take a history with a straight face from a 17-year-old who kept being distracted by just how much he loved his dad. I think my first question was, did you take anything tonight? And he was straight up and said, oh, yeah. Like a shit ton of acid. Want any? I 100% laughed at this statement. His dad was not amused. The patient was discharged the next morning. Not even close to being a doctor, but I saw a guy on DMT at a festival do a backwards caterpillar across the length of a football field whilst simultaneously grunting like he was being attacked. His journey came to an end when he crashed into a tree and could no longer reverse or work out how to go forwards. 5 minutes later he stood up and emblazoned on his shirt, "Nice people do drugs." It checked out. He was a lovely chapter. Not a doctor, but my sister is a nurse. She told me one time about a patient who came in out of his face on God knows what. They got him to a room where he was fine at first. They left him thinking he was asleep, but then they heard screaming, "I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna do IT." So my sister and this other nurse ran to the room to find him stood on the end of his bed. He was in a room with 2 other patients who were now screaming at him about how much he had to live for and not to do it. Can't remember much else of the story except that he jumped and twisted his ankle while these other 2 junkies were screaming. Not doctor, but sent a guy to the ER once because of them. Guy was breaking in trucks at the apartment complex I was security at. The locals, being none too pleased, chased him into the woods with yard tools. It was at this point we got the call. We know there is a fence back there, so he's in the woods. After hunting a while we find him unconscious with a plastic baggie next to him. We turn him over to the PD and M's. It was at this time he started screaming non-stop. Found out the next day from the PD he had a big baggie of shrooms on him, and thinking he'd be caught he took all of them. I feel like he was not having a fun ride. ER nurse here. Guy brought in by the police. Was found naked in a park and left by his friends because they couldn't contain him. Chased down eventually, but only after charging at cars like a bull running down the road into traffic. Was placed into a 4-point restraint and his voice altered between the devil and fairy voice, saying that we couldn't destroy him. He slept it off and went home. Not med staff, but registration in the ED. So I see and talk to way more people than med staff. And honestly, a lot of people tell me stuff they wouldn't tell med staff. Dumb, I know. But it leads to gems like this guy. I had one guy sitting on his bed just staring at his hands, touching his index and thumbs together over and over. When I walked in to get his info, he just stared into my eyes without blinking and said, "Dude, why do I have lobster hands?" I assured him that he did not. But he wasn't mad, just confused. I soon realized he should not sign consent forms in this condition and told him I would come back later. As I was about to walk out, he grabbed my arm. Being a 6 feet 250 pounds guy, I wasn't scared of physical harm, so I let his hand stay. But he had this look of terror excitement and said, "Just make sure not to step on any of the smurfs running around. They are everywhere." I thanked him and left. When I came back later, he was fine and seemed to have no recollection of anything. I am an emergency doctor, and in residency on the East Coast I had a patient on PCP who was brought in by cops because he was having sex with a tree and yelling, "Hip hop, don't stop." Note: the tree was not Groot. Fun fact: in the UK, magic mushrooms are classed as a class A drug for some reason, which is the same category as heroin and crack cocaine. I interviewed a kid on acid during medical school for about 45 minutes. At the end of it, I asked if he had any questions. He said, "Who's that guy?" referring to my bearded and bespectacled professor, who hadn't spoken the whole time. "What guy?" I replied. I went into the hospital on mushrooms once, and the weirdest part was probably me walking around my surveillance room wearing my bedsheets like a ghost costume. Not a doctor, but a patient ate them and cried for 6 hours laying on the floor, coming to terms with chronic illness and accepted it all in one night. Incredibly healing. Edit. Thank you for my first silver. Have a great day, everyone. I had a guy who was freaking out thinking he was going to die because he thought he had eaten too many hallucinogenic mushrooms. He went online and saw that sometimes patients are given activated charcoal to soak up the mushrooms in the stomach. Not entirely true BTW. So he goes outside and starts chowing down on charcoal briquettes that he has in his garage for grilling. After about a dozen he realizes, holy shit, I'm eating charcoal briquettes. Now he is really freaking out, so he grabs his dog, as he thinks he is never coming back to his house, and drives himself to the ED. He parks out front, walks into Tridge with the pup, black charcoal all over his face and hands, and says, I need a doctor and someone to watch my dog when I die. Last place I wanna go to when I'm tripping is a hospital. Obligatory edit. Wow, I've always been a lurker, never had so many people agree with me, lol. Also, shrooms are amazingly amazing. Have a good day, people. Nurse here. Used to work the night shift in a very small, rural ED in North Carolina. We had a couple in their 20s get picked up the local police. They were found in their car stopped on the train tracks looking very lost and confused. They had somehow made it from Raleigh and were attempting to get to the beach. We don't know exactly when they decided to take the LSD. So they're brought into the ED for an eval before they're let go. This being rural NC. No one had a clue about how to handle this type of situation. We basically gave them IV fluids, put them on cardiac monitors, and tried not to stimulate them too much. They were extremely polite. And since I was the closest in age to them and had some experience with recreational drugs, I did my best to engage them. As I was starting an IV on the male partner, I asked how he was feeling. Very safe, he replied. His pupils were as wide as saucers. I miss that job sometimes. I had a patient who had taken an ungodly amount of Benadryl in a failed suicide attempt. A lot of people think that since it makes you drowsy, a bunch of it might be able to kill them in their sleep. Instead of killing them though, Benadryl basically gives you absolutely terrifying hallucinations for like 24 hours or more and then leaves you with the worst multi-day hangover you have ever had in your life. He would not stop yelling and screaming about that damn cat poking its head out of the ceiling tiles every single time I left the room. He also had short bursts of thinking he was covered in bugs and I would find him stripped naked and yelling into the wall. I am a medic. Was working a concert in Chicago at Northerly Island a few years back for Fish Fest. Get a call for a male with his face in the ground. Find a shirtless 20-something-year-old with his pant undone and digging his face into the sand. I get next to the guy and tap his shoulder. Say, sir, do you know what's going on? Are you okay? To which he responds in the most classic stoner voice, do you know what's going on, man? And digs his face back in the sand with the stoniest of smiles you can imagine. We coax him out of the sand pit and he tells us he took 10. Just 10. Couldn't remember what of. Just 10. And honestly 10 is bad number of anything. Lol. 10 tabs of acid. 10 grams of weed. 10 grams of mushrooms. 10 shots. 10 heroines please. So we let him sit in the drunk tank with the rest of the tripped out goons. God bless their trippy little hearts. I was actually interviewing shadowing for a job in a trauma department. A patient came in after having a gigantic log roll over him. He was a lumberjack. Trucker. Either way he had an open ankle fracture, which means the bone is sticking out. He was obviously in a lot of pain. In order to set the ankle, he was given some fentanyl. I don't remember the dose. He went from literally screaming in pain to literally singing about having a pizza party. I'll never forget, we're gonna to have a pizza party. Pizza for everybody. Had a woman come into the ED after ingesting some PCP. She was convinced she was dead and kept telling me she didn't get her last rites. At one point she stripped off all her clothes and shat the bed. Also mistook me for Jesus at one point. She was freaking out for nearly 24 hours. My boyfriend is at Johns Hopkins right now, taking a heroic dose of psilocybin as part of their depression study. I will be picking him up in 7 hours. 2 weeks ago HW took a lesser dose with them. I can't say enough good things about the people running this study. If you want to get nothing in return, you can like and join my Discord. There is a link in the description.